Ever wondered what it was like to run a household in medieval times? Think managing your home today is tough. Try doing it without electricity, running water, or a quick trip to the grocery store. Number 8. Constant battle against disease and filth. Had you ever felt like fighting germs in your home is a never-ending battle? Imagine that fight without disinfectants, antibiotics, or even basic knowledge of how disease spreads. Medieval households faced an ongoing war against invisible enemies. The average medieval home was a breeding ground for fleas, lice, rats, and all manner of disease-carrying pests. Chamber pots and waste were often emptied right into the streets or nearby rivers that also served as sources of drinking water. The connection between filth and illness wasn't fully understood. Bathing wasn't a regular practice for most medieval folks. While the wealthy might occasionally indulge in a bath, the process of heating enough water made frequent bathing impractical. Most people would wash their hands and face daily, but full-body bathing might happen only a few times a year. Some believed that opening the pores through bathing actually made one more susceptible to disease, not less. Dental hygiene consisted primarily of rubbing teeth with rough cloths and using various herbs to freshen breath. Tooth decay and gum disease were rampant. Medieval people would sometimes gargle with wine or vinegar as a primitive mouthwash. When disease struck, remedies were based more on superstition and tradition than medical science. Households kept stores of herbs and poultices. Treatments often involved balancing the body's humors through bloodletting and purging. A household manager needed to know which herbs might help with common ailments and how to apply them. For the wealthy, this might mean directing servants in preparing remedies. For poorer households, it meant the lady of the house needed this knowledge herself. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the mid-14th century, killed an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population. Many households lost multiple members, devastating family units and changing the social structure of entire communities. Surviving such outbreaks required both luck and whatever crude preventative measures were available, such as burning aromatic herbs or sealing up homes against bad air. Number 7. Feeding a household without modern conveniences. What's for dinner when there's no refrigeration, no grocery stores, and no takeout? How did medieval households keep everyone fed without our modern conveniences? Food preservation was a year-round concern. Without refrigeration, keeping food edible required complex and labor-intensive methods. Meat was preserved by smoking, salting, or drying. Fish might be pickled or salted. Fruits were dried or preserved with honey. Vegetables were often fermented or stored in cool, dark places like root cellars. Medieval households planned their meals around seasonal availability and preservation methods. Winter meals relied heavily on stored foods and preserved meats. Spring brought welcome fresh greens and the first new vegetables. Summer and fall were times of relative plenty, but also intense work-preserving foods for the lean months ahead. Bread was a staple at every meal and required significant labor to produce. The process began with growing and harvesting grain, then threshing and milling it into flour. Baking itself was typically done in communal ovens in towns or in the manor's oven in rural areas. Poorer households might use simple hearth breads cooked in the ashes of their fire. For peasant households, the daily diet centered around a porridge or pottage, a thick soup containing whatever vegetables were available, sometimes with small amounts of meat for flavor. Bread and ale accompanied most meals. The wealthy enjoyed more variety, including multiple meat dishes, imported spices, and finer breads. Ale and beer were dietary staples consumed by all ages. Water sources were often contaminated, making fermented beverages a safer option. Most households brewed their own ale, a process requiring careful management of ingredients and fermentation conditions. Feasts and celebrations required special planning and resources. During religious seasons like Lent, households had to adapt to church-mandated dietary restrictions, which prohibited meat but allowed fish. Managing food supplies to accommodate these requirements added another layer of complexity to the household manager's role. Number 6. Textile production and clothing maintenance. Ever looked at your closet full of clothes and still thought, "I have nothing to wear"? Medieval people owned just a few garments their entire lives. How did that cloth production started with raw materials like wool from sheep, flax for linen, or occasionally silk for the wealthy? These materials required extensive processing before becoming usable thread. Wool needed to be cleaned, carded, and spun. Flax had to be retted, broken, scutched, and hackled before spinning could begin. Spinning thread was primarily women's work and consumed countless hours. A skilled spinner using a drop spindle could produce about 1 pound of thread per week, barely enough for a small piece of clothing. After the introduction of the spinning wheel in the late medieval period, productivity improved somewhat, but remained labor-intensive. Weaving thread into cloth was the next step. Wealthier households might purchase cloth from professional weavers, but many households, especially in rural areas, produced their own cloth on home looms. A simple tunic required several weeks of work from fleece to finished garment. Dyeing clothes involved natural substances like woad, blue, madder, red, and weld, nello. These dyes were inconsistent and often faded quickly. Brightly colored clothing was a luxury reserved for the wealthy, while peasants typically wore undyed woolens and linens in natural colors. Medieval garments were treasured and maintained with great care. Clothes were patched and repaired repeatedly. When garments were finally beyond repair, the fabric was cut and repurposed into smaller items or used as patches. Nothing went to waste. Laundry presented its own challenges. Without modern detergents, clothes were cleaned using lye soap, wood ash, or sometimes just plain water. Linens might be spread in the sun to bleach. Winter weather made drying clothes difficult, and freezing temperatures could make washing nearly impossible during certain months. For noble households, clothing represented status and required significant resources. Silks, furs, and fine wools displayed wealth and position. Maintaining an appropriate wardrobe for the lord and lady involved, managing not just the clothing itself, but also the staff required to produce and maintain it. Number 5. Managing household staff and family dynamics. Think your family relationships are complicated. Imagine living in multi-generational households with servants, apprentices, and extended family all under one roof. How did medieval households maintain order? Medieval households were hierarchical, with clear chains of authority. At the top stood the head of the household, typically the oldest male. The widows sometimes headed households. Below him came other family members. Then various servants and workers, arranged in their own hierarchies. Noble households could be extraordinarily complex, with dozens or even hundreds of servants. Managing this staff required delegation through a hierarchy of trusted individuals. The lady of the house might directly oversee the steward, chamberlain, and other high-ranking servants, who in turn managed those below them. Even modest households might include servants, apprentices, or laborers. A successful craftsman would have apprentices living in his home, learning his trade while providing labor. These young people were considered part of the household under the authority and protection of the master. Children were viewed differently than they are today. Childhood, as we understand it, didn't really exist. Children were seen as small adults and put to work at an early age. By 7, most children had responsibilities, contributing to the household. By the early teens, many were apprenticed or sent to serve in other households. Medieval marriages were primarily economic and social arrangements rather than love matches. The joining of two people meant the joining of resources, property, and sometimes political connections. Managing these relationships and the resulting complex family trees could create tensions within households. Privacy was nearly non-existent. Most homes consisted of 1 or 2 rooms where everyone ate, worked, and slept. Even in larger homes and castles, private chambers were rare and often shared. Servants might sleep in the same room as family members, particularly during winter when heating multiple rooms was impractical. Discipline within the household fell to its head. Medieval law recognized the right of a household head to physically discipline those under his authority, including his wife, children, and servants. This created potential for abuse, though community standards generally curbed the worst excesses. Number 4. Home security and protection. Feeling safe at home. Medieval households faced threats we can hardly imagine today. How did they protect themselves without police, alarm systems, or even proper locks? Physical security began with the structure itself. Windows were small, few, and often covered with wooden shutters rather than glass. Doors were sturdy and reinforced with metal. Wealthier homes might have multiple layers of security, with an outer gate or wall before reaching the main dwelling. Urban areas presented unique challenges. Medieval towns were crowded with houses built shoulder to shoulder. Fire was a constant threat that could quickly consume entire neighborhoods of wooden buildings. Town watches existed in some places, but were often ineffective against determined criminals. Rural households faced different dangers. Isolated farms and manors could be targeted by bandits or raiders with little hope of assistance. During times of war or unrest, rural areas were particularly vulnerable to roving bands of soldiers or displaced people. Castles represented the ultimate in medieval home security, designed specifically with defense in mind. Multiple layers of walls, moats, drawbridges, and portcullises created formidable defenses. Even modest manor houses often incorporated defensive elements like moats or walled courtyards. Legal protection varied widely. Justice was administered locally, often by the lord of the manor or town officials. There was no police force, as we understand it today. Night watchmen in towns might raise an alarm for fire or obvious crimes, but investigation and prosecution of crimes fell largely to victims themselves. Weapons were commonly kept in medieval households for both hunting and protection. Knives, axes, and agricultural implements served double duty as weapons when needed. Those who could afford them might keep swords, bows, or other purpose-made weapons. Supernatural threats were considered as real as physical ones. Homes were protected with religious symbols, herbs, and various folk practices believed to ward off everything from disease to witchcraft. These spiritual defenses were taken very seriously and maintained as diligently as physical barriers. Number 3. Financial management without banking systems. Struggling to balance your budget. Imagine doing it without banking, credit cards, or even reliable currency. How did medieval households handle their finances? Medieval economies operated primarily on barter and trade rather than cash transactions, particularly in rural areas. A farmer might trade eggs for blacksmith services or grain for new shoes. Keeping track of these exchanges and ensuring fair value required careful attention. When currency was used, it came with its own complications. Different regions had different coins, and their value could fluctuate. Coins might be clipped, shaved, or counterfeited. Determining which coins were genuine and valuable required knowledge and experience. Wealthy households might store coins and valuables in locked chests or hidden compartments. Some entrusted their wealth to monasteries or other religious institutions for safekeeping. There were no insured banks or safety deposit boxes to secure excess wealth. Credit existed in informal networks based on reputation and relationships. A merchant might extend credit to known customers, keeping records of debts in memory or simple ledgers. These arrangements relied heavily on trust and community enforcement rather than legal contracts. Record keeping was primarily oral for most households. Only the wealthy or merchants typically kept written financial records, and literacy was limited. Tallies, notches, and other memory aids helped track debts and credits over time. For peasants owing service or rent to a lord, managing these obligations alongside household needs required careful planning. Failure to meet obligations could result in severe penalties, including loss of land rights or legal action. Saving for emergencies or large purchases presented challenges without banking systems. Extra food might be stored, coins hidden away, or valuable items purchased that could be sold in times of need. Livestock often served as a form of savings, with animals representing stored value that could be liquidated when necessary. Number 2. Heating, lighting, and basic comfort. Annoyed when your heater breaks down or the power goes out? Medieval households dealt with these challenges daily. How did they manage to stay warm, see in the dark, and maintain any level of comfort? The hearth was literally and figuratively the heart of the medieval home. It provided heat, light, and a place to cook. Most homes had a central hearth, with smoke venting through a hole in the roof. Chimneys became more common in the later medieval period, improving heating efficiency and reducing smoke inside homes. Fuel gathering consumed significant time and resources. Wood was the primary heating fuel, though peat, coal, and animal dung were used in areas where wood was scarce. Gathering sufficient fuel for winter required planning and labor throughout the year. Fuel was rationed carefully, with heating often limited to the main living area. Lighting relied primarily on rushlights, tallow candles, and oil lamps. All provided dim, smoky light that required constant attention. Wax candles gave better light, but were expensive and reserved for the wealthy or special occasions. Most households conducted their activities by daylight when possible, adjusting their schedules seasonally. Bedding consisted of straw or woolen mattresses on wooden frames or directly on floors. Multiple people typically shared beds for warmth and space efficiency. Bed bugs, fleas, and other pests were constant companions. Wealthy households used bed curtains for warmth and some privacy. Temperature control was rudimentary. In winter, people wore multiple layers indoors and often slept fully clothed. Drafts were combated with tapestries, wall hangings, and rushes on floors. During summer heat, there were few options for cooling beyond opening windows and doors. Water had to be carried from wells, rivers, or streams, making its use highly selective. The labor involved in hauling and heating water meant that it was prioritized for cooking and drinking rather than cleaning or bathing. In towns, communal wells served multiple households, creating gathering places and social hubs. Weather affected daily life dramatically. Rain could turn roads to impassable mud, isolating households. Winter cold could freeze water supplies and make fuel more crucial than ever. Summer drought might threaten crops and water sources. The household manager needed to anticipate and prepare for these seasonal challenges. Number 1. Food, production, and agricultural management. Think growing a few herbs in your window box is challenging. Medieval households produced nearly everything they ate. How did they manage to feed themselves through all seasons? The agricultural year dictated the rhythm of medieval life. Spring brought plowing and planting, summer required weeding and tending, fall was harvest time, and winter focused on processing and preserving food while maintaining livestock. Each season had its crucial tasks that couldn't be postponed. Field management followed complex systems developed over centuries. The three-field rotation system, common in medieval Europe, left 1/3 of the land fallow each year to restore fertility. Crops were rotated to maintain soil health, with grains typically followed by legumes or other nitrogen-fixing plants. For peasant households, the standard land allotment was typically around 30 acres, the amount considered necessary to support a family. This land wasn't in a single plot, but scattered in strips throughout the community fields. Managing these dispersed plots added complexity to agricultural work. Gardens supplemented field crops and provided essential variety in the diet. Most households maintained kitchen gardens with vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants. These gardens required different care than field crops, with more intensive management and protection from animals. Livestock represented both food sources and working animals. Oxen and horses provided draft power for plowing and transport. Cows, goats, and sheep supplied milk and wool. Pigs converted household waste and forest forage into valuable protein. Chickens and other poultry provided eggs and meat. Each animal required specific knowledge about feeding, breeding, and health care. The interface between wild and cultivated resources was important to medieval households. Forests provided fuel, building materials, forage for pigs, and hunting opportunities. Rights to use forest resources were carefully regulated and fiercely protected. Weather disasters could destroy months of work in hours. A late frost summer hailstorm or early freeze might ruin crops with no recourse. Households needed to maintain enough reserves to survive until the next harvest, even after such disasters, a challenging feat of planning and management. Community coordination was essential for agricultural success. Field rotations, harvest timing, and resource sharing required cooperation among households. Village councils or manorial courts established rules and resolved disputes about these shared activities. Have you ever wondered how different your life would be if you had to handle all these responsibilities without our modern conveniences? Would you survive the challenges of managing a medieval household, or would the constant battle against disease, hunger, and the elements prove too much?